something important for us to recognize is God's part in the establishment of things. I mean, even look, if we're going to look nationally, like we even look at our own country and how God set us up nationally in a very fruitful place. And we've had really here in America, we have everything that we need. It's been called the breadbasket of the world, and it's God's doing. God has protected America. He's truly put a hedge about this nation, and unfortunately, it's began to wobble. And we're seeing the good and bad presidents and leadership and all that come in, because once that hedge is removed, then all kinds of things get let in that don't care for the land, that don't appreciate the vineyard, the fruit producing vineyard that it was. They don't see it, if you will, as a gift from God. They begin to take it for granted. They begin to think that, well, it's always going to be this way because it is right now. And they forgot where they were and how they were in bondage and what it took to get them to that place. Break it down. They break down all the barriers of protection, all the standards, if you will, all the things that would protect them and keep them in that place without being overtaken. The way to make things work for a time would be to oppress people, to put them in bondage, to put them under a strict rule, letting the wicked rule just for peace sake for a time. But Isaiah 5 verse number 1 says, "Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard and a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress thereof. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes." And so this vineyard analogy is used, Old Testament's used in the New Testament, and some further thought there, New Testament. But in this particular text with Isaiah prophesying, basically from around 745 to 695, well before they would be taken out of the land, and his prophesying would span the kings of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and part of the very early part of Manasseh. And if you know those kings at all, you kind of know the progression of those kings, and some good, some not. Of course, Hezekiah, good. Manasseh, very bad. Ahaz, not good. But it kind of went back and forth. And that's kind of how when a land, or even a smaller group, if you will, begins to wobble and become unstable, you see this back and forth between good and evil. And so we saw that here in Israel with the kings. And so Isaiah is prophesying, and he gives the analogy of a vineyard. And God basically said here, I have set you up extremely nicely in your land. He says he fenced it. He put them in a fruitful hill, a very fruitful place. And we know the land of Canaan was a place that flowed milk and honey, as it was said. And they went in and found huge grapes as they went in and scoped the land out, and just a very, very fruitful hill. So it was capable of bearing fruit. It was capable of being very, very fertile. Well, it was fertile, capable of being very, very fruitful. And he fenced it, so he protected them. And it just goes on, and he's talking about what he did. So we know when God pulled them, delivered them out of Egypt and brought them unto this land. Of course, at first they didn't go, but once they did go in, he led them through the clearing out of the land, and they weren't all that faithful in that, but still to the point that God set them up very, very nicely. I think that's something important for us to recognize, is God's part in the establishment of things. I mean, even look, if we're going to look nationally, like we even look at our own country and how God set us up nationally in a very fruitful place. And we've had really here in America, we have everything that we need. It's been called the breadbasket of the world, and it's God's doing. God has protected America. He's truly put a hedge about this nation, and unfortunately, it's began to wobble. And we're seeing the good and bad presidents and leadership and all that come in. And this is exactly really what Israel saw. And so we're kind of seeing that play out here as well. And God made them a great nation. And we know much was accomplished there through them. And of course, God, the same for us. This is even true, even in more of a microcosm with churches, potentially even families, where you see some families that are set up very, very, very well. And then a few generations later, you see nothing that's decent there, because it wobbles and then ultimately falls. and the protections that God had gave it and all that have to be removed. But anyway, look, if you keep your place near, we'll come right back. But if you look over at Deuteronomy 6 in verse number 10, God warned them of this early on before they even went into Canaan. Deuteronomy would be just before they're getting ready to go in, and the second giving of the law to all those that were too young to have heard the first. And it says in Deuteronomy 6 verse 10, and it shall be when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee great and goodly cities which thou buildest not, and houses full of good things which thou fillest not, and wells digged which thou diggest not, vineyards and olive trees which thou plantest not. When thou shalt have eaten and be full, then beware lest thou forget the Lord, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, and serve him, and shalt swear by his name. And ye shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are around you. For the Lord thy God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord thy God be kindled against thee, and destroy thee from off the face of the earth. And ye shall not tempt the Lord your God, as ye tempted him in Mesa. Ye shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his testimonies and his statutes which he hath commanded thee. And thou shalt do that which is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest go in and possess the good land which the Lord sware unto thy fathers, to cast out all thine enemies from before thee, as the Lord hath spoken it. And so we see this. And so they were warned, they were told, and I'm sure this was understood, though even that at times would fade and be forgotten. And from that, they would slide. And we know the issues that Israel had, even when they were together, not split, and how the things that Solomon went through that ultimately did fracture the nation. And then, of course, as Rehoboam came in, he furthered that fracture, and we see the splitting of the kingdoms. And when Isaiah's preaching here, he actually preached to Judah mainly, touched a little bit Israel, but Israel was taken captive. The northern kingdom was taken captive in this time. And so he began in 745, would prophesy all the way into 695. And so that was right during the time of Assyria coming in and taking away the northern kingdom, and then pressing hard on that southern kingdom when this began to take place. And so if you look back at Isaiah chapter 4, and I'm sorry, Isaiah chapter 5 and verse number 5, we'll see here now exactly what takes place in this progression, and how when a nation, a people group, church, family, when they've been given much, when God has set them up in a fertile hill and protected them and all that, what happens when that place starts to fall, when the glory days, if you will, diminish. It says here in verse number 5, it says, and now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof. So the first thing we see happen in a situation like this is that God removes that hedge of protection. So it's not that he himself destroyed the land, just the wall of protection gets removed. And we find from that, it says, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And from there, it goes on to be laid waste. But the reason that the thing starts to really, I guess, decay or get trampled under, trampled down, trampled underfoot, and all that, is because once that hedge is removed, then all kinds of things get let in that don't care for the land, that don't appreciate the vineyard, the fruit producing vineyard that it was. They don't see it, if you will, as a gift from God. They begin to take it for granted. They begin to think that, well, it's always going to be this way because it is right now. And they forgot where they were and how they were in bondage and what it took to get them to that place. All those years through the wilderness, all the decisions that had to be made, and when they weren't made right, then how God had to correct that and bring them into the land. So these that are here that were basically handed the vineyard without going through the process to see it come to pass, they didn't appreciate it. And so ultimately they didn't serve God. They didn't glorify God through the land, and they didn't hold him in high esteem for this. But it was all God and not man. And so they began to think that it was them. And of course, then God removed the hedge, and then it began to crumble. And so we find that as he removes the hedge of protection, then people come in and just ravage the fruit. They don't care for the vineyard, and the vineyard begins to go downhill. They further break down the wall. Whatever's left of the wall, they break it down. They break down all the barriers of protection, all the standards, if you will, all the things that would protect them and keep them in that place without being overtaken. And so the world has come in into Israel and broke it down, and they've let a lot of the world in, and this takes place in nations that see the hand of God removed. And we're seeing that here in America as well, that all the walls of protection are being removed, and it's being trodden down. And people are talking about, handing out this and handing out that, and everybody should be successful, and everybody this and all that. So everything's being laid waste now, and that's just the way it goes. But this also happens in churches where the work is done from the foundation up, and much is there, and then when people come in that don't appreciate that, or those that even were a part of the building, they no longer give God the credit, and then they let the thing just all the walls be tore down, and then of course it is ultimately laid waste, as it says in this verse number 6. It says, "And I will lay it waste, and it shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns." And so after the wall is tore down and it begins to get overrun and the fruit abused and trashed, then there's no caring for the vineyard. It's just laid waste. It's not pruned. Everything needs pruning. Our lives need pruning. Our church needs pruning. Our families need pruning. And that's just going in and cutting out the dead. Dead wood in the tree is important, lest the dead wood weights down the good branches, and they fall and they cause damage below, and they just take away from the tree. And so that the pruning of the vine needs place. And we even see that in the New Testament, that I am the vine, ye are the branches, right? And that whole analogy there. And he's the one that prunes and takes care of those branches. But we also have responsibility in the fruit production part of that vine as well. And so we see here how this takes place. And so there's no digging, there's no taking care of the vines, planting new vines, none of that. There's briars and thorns come in and they choke out the good plants. And so all this happens. Why? Because God's hedge of protection is removed. And it says, "And I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it." And then this is the supernatural aspect of a nation, of a family, of a church that's required for that fruit to properly grow. The fruit, remember, it's not from us. It ultimately comes from the vine. We're the branches, but that vine, which is likened unto God, Christ, that needs to flow those nutrients to and through the branch. Well, if God takes away the rain, then that water is removed. And once that water is removed, which is likened unto the word of God, once that's removed, then the fruit can't grow either. So we just see the downward progression of an entity, a nation, a church, a family that God has set up. God has put in a fruitful place. God has done work. And then we see its degradation because people stop giving God the glory for it. They stop recognizing him as the one who's provided all things, the protection, the rain, everything, the embattlements, the care, even placing them at that point. And then it says in verse number 7, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, and behold oppression, and righteousness, but behold a cry." So the end result is this, is that there's no more judgment, no more God's judgment is referring to God's opinion. There's no more opinion of God in the land. Now it's just every man does that which is right in their own eyes. There's no more proper adjudication of things. It's just lawlessness. And what overtakes the nation, the family, the church is oppression. The only way to make things work for a time would be to oppress people, to put them in bondage, to put them under a strict rule, letting the wicked rule just for peace sake for a time. But that leads downhill as well. And then instead of righteousness, that's not there anymore, but behold a cry. And so now everybody is oppressed. Everybody is on the wrong side of things. Nothing works out. It just becomes a horrible place to live and to operate. And this was the downfall of Israel before they were taken out of the land. And of course, they were given a reset in Babylon and brought back. And that worked for a short time. It was short-lived, led to the silent years, and of course the coming of Christ. And we know ultimately the only thing that's going to fix this issue with Israel will be the coming of Christ, the Messiah. And the only thing that fixes a family, a church, a nation today is Christ, his word, his protection, his mercy, his grace. But when God is not held in proper esteem, when God is not held in that right spot, and his word is not exalted and magnified, then this is the progression that we see take place. And so this is a really, really nice I guess, outline of what happens to an entity, a people group that God established, God fortified, God put in place, established it, and then started to bring forth fruit. What happens when people stop giving God the glory, stop recognizing him as that main part? Then the degradation starts. How does it start? The walls of protection are removed by God. The hedge is removed. And then all these things start coming in, and that's what destroys it.